when your spiritual practices go from helping you to hurting your mental health. We're going to talk about that today because it's an important topic. It's a topic that I've experienced and an experience I've had myself, but I've also seen many people who I've treated have struggles in this area of life with their spiritual life, their religion, and it becoming a traumatizing event for them. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about several ways where you see a spiritual practice helping and how it can go to another extreme of being harmful. So I'm going to start with a story. I'm going to start this with a movie that I really want to connect with this to give the comparison. I want to start with a movie that really speaks strongly to this and the pain in this, and I want to end with some historical information that is very liberating. So stay to the end. And before we get started with the story, I would like for you to like this video and subscribe to my channel. So, I don't know if you've seen the movie Birth of a Nation. Birth of a Nation is one of those movies, I can't watch these types of movies over and over again, but I have watched this movie a few times. Birth of a Nation was based on the story of Nat Turner. And it was a slave rebellion, basically, that happened with Nat Turner. And so just to preface this movie and to just like give a quick summary of what this movie was about. So Nat Turner was a slave in the time of chattel slavery. And in that time, he, knew the Bible well. He lived as a Christian, and he was, I guess what you would say, a good Christian. And slave masters, appointed him at the plantation he lived. They appointed him to eventually read the Bible to the slaves, because most people were not allowed to read. Most slaves were not allowed to read. So he was to preach the word of God according to the Bible to the other slaves. And so in this process, he was very dedicated to this. He believed very strongly in the Bible, and he was to teach it in a certain way to the slaves, in a way that was more about sin and being a sinner and not being worthy of, of salvation, and, being in situations because of sin. There was a lot of this type of talk, and a lot of talk and energy around the word was from a place of being a sinner. And so not necessarily deserving, anything good in life because you're a sinner, right? So this is how he would preach the sermons. This is how he would preach the things, doing it wholeheartedly because he had strong faith in this. Somewhere in the movie, you could see that he was being a bit more convicted in how these messages were being taught, or how he was teaching these methods, teaching these messages. And at some point in the movie, there was a scene, not going to completely spoil it if you've never seen this movie, but there was a point where what he basically began to recognize is that the slaves became very docile, very passive, were not going to rise up against not only were they not going to rise up against the slave masters, but they were so passive, they allowed like the most heinous treatment and didn't fight back or didn't rise up. And often, I think what he began to see is how the slave masters, the slave owners were using him to create this in the slaves, which caused them to be able to cause more harm and be more abusive and be more controlling of the slaves. And the slave owners were going to be as heinous as they wanted to, because they didn't see the slaves and the Black people as human. So to first dehumanize someone is that thing that can cause you to just do things that you wouldn't do to the average person that you saw as a full human. We know that there was insane levels of mistreatment happening. So when he saw this, however, this is when he rebelled. Ultimately, he rebelled. He rose up against the slave masters. He organized, and obviously, unfortunately, he was murdered in the end of this because he was captured and he was murdered. But I always wonder with Nat Turner, had he lived through this rebellion somehow, had he lived through it, had he escaped it, what would how would this have impacted his spirituality, his spiritual beliefs, his belief in what he was, kind of trained to do? How would that have impacted him? What would have changed? Because I don't think there's any way that you could have experienced something like that and not had to, go and reconcile, how much of this was used as propaganda to cause harm and how much of it was truth, or that he would look at as still being truthful for him in his life. So, this is a very great example of how spiritual practices or religions, can be manipulated, or people can be manipulated through them and cause more harm. We can only imagine the mental state of many of the people who experience this, the anxiety, the fear, the depression, the things that people experience, the rage that people experience because of the massive mistreatment that came from utilizing a spiritual text to control a group of people. So let's get into a few ways that this comes across, even today. Yeah, while we may not be in chattel slavery, we can still see, though, how spirituality, religions, can be used to control people and manipulate, and it can harm a person's mental health. So the first one is going to be talking about what spiritual practices, what we think what they do when they're really helping us, but then what they're doing when they're harming us. So one thing that a spiritual practice does or can do is give you deeper meaning to the pain that you're experiencing. It can give you deeper meaning to the pain that you're experiencing. I think about the people who have endured slavery, that their spiritual beliefs help them to endure pain, but just prolonged and never ending, however. But it was something that did give them strength because they were, to endure pain, or maybe in our everyday life, if we're going through things, we can have a deeper meaning to understanding that the things that we're experiencing, that there's some spiritual meaning to it. There's something deeper happening in the midst of that. So this is something that can be helpful to help us move through pain and get on the other side of our pain, to understand that there can be deeper meaning to our pain. But on the other end of this, could be where you are taught or have this belief that you are deserving of the pain, or the pain is a punishment for sinful behavior, or for or because you're not worthy of good things. So those are the two extremes. You think about people who endured slavery, and think about these people that we talk about when we're talking about Nat Turner and Birth of a Nation. There were people who, were in a situation where they endured this pain, and they were taught through the teachings that they were getting in the churches, is that because you're a sinner, this is part of that, and that your glory and escape from that will be when you die. So it can teach you to never try to come out of painful situations. And how many painful situations are people in today, where you could be believing that the way that you get away from this pain is when you leave this earth, as opposed to being present now and dealing with the hell you're experiencing on earth, so that you're not dealing with this pain, and understanding that you are able to do things about your situations today, and that it's good to do things about your situations today that take you away from suffering. that you don't have to wait until, you are no longer living to experience some type of peace. So that's the first way. That's the first way that there could be these two extremes where the spiritual practices go from being helpful to being harmful to our mental health. Because when we're suffering like this, a lot of depression, again, can be a big part of your experience. The second way that we can look at this is that, I have to blow up my notes here. So when I feel when we're in healthy spiritual practices, we can feel and understand that that we are connecting to a inner power. Like there's a power within us that is more than just this flesh and bones, that, we have a deeper power within us. One of those is one of the scriptures from the Bible that talks about the kingdom of God is within. And if you really think about what that means that the creator, God, or the divine is also within you. So if you know that this is within you, then, you can feel the power of who it is that you are more, as opposed to, because you have this power within you, and so it can take away levels of fear in certain situations. It can remind you of what you're made of or where you come from, to get through certain situations. But on the other end of this, there can be this teaching that makes you feel that God is completely on the outside of you. You're completely void of that, and everything that you need, you have to look outside of yourself, which in many situations, it can cause, a lot of vulnerability and harm, because you can go looking to a pastor to give you all of the answers. You can go looking to a spiritual leader to give you all of your answers. And, these are people who are everyday humans. And unfortunately, in our society, many people trust a pastor just because of the title, not knowing that they haven't earned that, or you don't know much about their character except what you see, superficially in many situations. You see them, in a church or a spiritual space, that you see them superficially. But there are many people who have caused so much harm because people don't recall, we're not taught, or we don't remember that the divine is within us, and we have this power within ourselves. If we get still and tap into that there is power there. And I think about like the Jim Jones massacre that occurred. Someone who's not healthy in their own state can take advantage of people who are vulnerable because they're hurting spiritually, they're hurting emotionally, and they're looking for answers. And so that can be utilized and be used to harm people. And many people have been harmed. Spiritual practices help. They help you to recognize that there's an inner knowing, there's an inner guidance, there's an inner connection that can help center you and keep you grounded and help to guide you. But when spiritual practices and religions go wrong, it can go bad. It can teach you that everything is outside of you, and it can cause you to be looking outside of you to other people who are human, and who many of them are not in the best mental space within themselves. And again, many people have been harmed this way because, fear is one of those things that causes you to try to flock to, something. And when fear is brought into spirituality and made to feel, like everything about spirit and spirituality and religion, there's the element of this that we should be fearful of. Fear causes more vulnerability, and unfortunately, there are some people who take advantage of vulnerability. So these are the two extremes there. Third would be when you think about spiritual practices, when they are healthy, they can be things that help to center you. There are things that can help, some people would say, regulate your nervous system, or help to calm you, help to relax you. That might be through meditative practices. That might be through, connecting with nature. That might be through, prayer. you know. But when we are on the other end of this and it is unhealthy, there's a lot of fear behind some spiritual belief systems. This fear of, all the doom and gloom that will happen to you if you don't do things a specific way, if you don't do it the way that this particular text says to do things, that then there's a punishment coming to you. There are ramifications coming to you. And, this can cause a lot of anxiety for many people because many people don't know if they've done enough to satisfy whatever it is that we're saying God is requiring in order for someone to be, in a safe space at the end of their life when they're transitioning. So this can cause a lot of fear and a lack of enjoying life. And when I say that, I don't mean enjoying life and just doing all the things, just like, whatever you may think as immoral or doing, bad things to people because there are no ramifications. That's, I am not saying that, but I am saying that many people do not live their life to experience good in life because life becomes so serious that everything becomes about making sure you're not punished when you leave here. And that's not really living through our authentic nature. That's not really living from a place of peace or a place of ease. That is, rooted in fear, and fear causes anxiety. So as it gets more and more unraveled, it causes anxiety. And so this is also not a healthy space to be in. I think that there's another point that I wanted to make when it comes to the two ends of the spectrum when we talk about spirituality and spiritual practices and how they can be helpful for our mental health and then how they can go awry and be harmful to us. But let me just say that an example of a liberating example of a group of people who really use their spiritual practices in a powerful way would be people in Haiti with the Haitian Revolution. And a lot of people will really knock this because I believe their practice was voodoo. And there's this very negative connotation around voodoo. And if I'm just being honest, I've had that negative connotation around voodoo, but if I'm being completely honest, I've never known what it even is. I just know that subconsciously, somewhere in my past, I have been taught that that is not a good thing. And if I know that that has been my experience, I know for most people, I'm not going to even say most, I'm going to say many people, their perception of voodoo comes from a subconscious belief that we've been given through other systems. But if we really think about the Haitian Revolution, these were people, human beings, who were being enslaved, and the people who were enslaving them were the people practicing Christianity, but they were enslaving them, treating them in the most heinous of ways, and eventually they went back to, even though many of them did practice Christianity, they went back to some of their ancestral practices, which one of those was voodoo. And with that, they engaged more with nature, and also not having a fear of death, not having a fear of death, and utilizing all that these practices encompass. I'm not sure what all it encompassed, but I do know part of that was engaging in nature, and a part of that was not being afraid to die. Then they couldn't be controlled by the idea of being killed. And also, they overturned slavery for them and freed themselves from that experience. And I think about that because I'm like, why are we demonizing something that we don't really understand? Because one text says that it should be demonized, or I'm not even sure if the text speaks specifically about people who practice voodoo, but they, when we look at what has happened within that particular religion, the most demonic things that I think could happen through slavery, why do we look at that as, how is it that we look at voodoo, which many of us don't really even understand it, but we do know it helped them overturn slavery. Why are we looking at that as the terrible thing and looking at another spiritual system that has caused so much destruction and pain with people as the positive thing? And I'm not here to determine which you do, but I am saying that oftentimes we're not necessarily looking at the damage that happens in the spiritual practices that are being practiced, that everyday people are practicing. Some people are maybe having some help from them, but many people are receiving a lot of harm from them. So there are two extremes. And there is also a teaching that really I want to leave with you that I think has been very helpful for me. And this is dealing with Kemetic science. And Kemetic science comes from ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, Egypt was called Kemet. And there is a thing called Kemetic science that really talks about the practices that people in Kemet in ancient Egypt practiced. And they had these 42 laws of Ma'at, was the name of the laws. And I don't practice the laws per se. Like I'm not here to try to memorize those laws and practice those. I have an awareness of many of them, but one of them is to respect others' altars. And I think that this is very powerful. And I want to just kind of share a few statements that, summarizes that. So when we talk about honoring other people's altars, it doesn't mean that you go and do what someone else is doing, but you provide a level of respect to what other people are doing, as opposed to coming into what other people do and trying to place upon them what you do as a way to, tell them what they should do. So when they talk about respecting others' altars, it means respecting what is sacred to someone else. It also means not desecrating or belittling someone else's belief systems or spiritual practices. And it also means recognizing that everyone's connection with the divine may look different. And I think that this is such a healthy thing to practice, right? I feel like this is so healthy because for me, looking at people who, if their spiritual practices are helping them to be better people in the world, are helping them to live a more harmonious life for themselves, it's causing them to, not be dealing with as much mental health issues, if it's helping them with that, and it's helping them to provide good in the world, then that's something I respect. It's something that I can look at and learn from. And I think if we really think about the nature of life, as vast as life is, as many different places in the world that there are, as many different cultures that there are and practices that there are, it wouldn't quite make sense if everyone was doing the exact same thing. If we look in nature and we just see the diversity that we see in nature, just from the flowers that are in one place as opposed to another place, the foods that are that grow in one area as opposed to another area, when we talk about things growing naturally, there is diversity. And when it comes to a person's spiritual practices, it can be that as well. And there is that as well. And I think that recognizing how to utilize spiritual practices to help elevate you, to make you personally a better person, as opposed to trying to incite what other people should do, is a better use of that tool, of that practice, to be able to see, does this make me wake up feeling better? Does this make me wake up wanting to do better or be better or treat people better, as opposed to some other things that we can see happening in many spiritual practices. So that's something that I am sharing with you today. Again, like this video. I would appreciate you liking this video, and also subscribing to my channel, and share this video with someone who you think could really benefit from this information. But otherwise, that's it. I appreciate the time. I will see you in the next video. Have a great week. And yeah, toodles. Bye.